All right, it's day 2 on the Wrx clutch install. It's a 2015 to 2020. It's going to be the same thing, but we got the clutch and the transmission out, and I'm going to show you some of the used parts that we found. The clutch itself, the rivets are all the way worn through. You can see them. This thing was completely glazed and all the way down to the rivets. So the customer was right. He definitely needed a new clutch. Another thing on that is these are heat spots, and this is the groove from that rivet. And so this pressure plate is 100% destroyed. This isn't really a serviceable part. You just replace it, it's scrap. So that's scrap. And last night we talked a little bit about the flywheel. Turns out it is an X-City flywheel, so our X-City clutch kit is gonna bolt right up, no problem. And this here is your throwout bearing. You can see it's got this rusty color on it. That's always a bad sign. Anything that's really worn out is gonna have that rusty on it. And in the video last night, you could see when I peeked up in there that there was a lot of that discoloration there. That's from severe service and wear. This is the new throwout bearing. We're going to show you how to install that. It looks a little different than a lot of throwout bearings that I've seen. Has this little fork deal on it, and so to get it on here, all you're going to do is pop this out. It's real simple. I've already cleaned the splines with the wire brush and the surface that this bearing rides on. It's really simple though. You just slide it in just like that. As you can see, these are cleaned and it's greased with ceramic grease. Another tip, when you get your kit, you want to check your pilot bearing. Make sure that the pilot bearing slides on the input shaft of the transmission, because there's no more frustrating thing than trying to line up your tranny and coming to find out that your pilot bearing is the wrong size and it won't go that last bit. So before you install that, go ahead and slide that on there once, just to make sure that it's the right size. Another tip on that is take the flywheel off on this, and to replace that pilot bearing, go ahead and pull your flywheel off and push the pilot bearing out of the flywheel from the backside. It's much easier than trying to extract it with grease or bread. I've seen all kinds of tricks, but you don't need to do that. Just take the 8 bolts off, grab the flywheel, grab a hammer, pop it out, flip it over, tap in your new bearing, re-bolt it up. It's 55 foot-pounds is the torque spec, and then it's 12 foot-pounds on the pressure plate. Will come under the car. Underneath the car, we already have the pressure plate bolted to our flywheel. Everything's cleaned up, and we're ready to install our transmission. Okay, so now we're underneath the car. We got the transmission jacked all the way up to where it needs to go. I went ahead and aligned the stuff up just because it's kind of like you move it around a bunch, but I'm going to show you some of the tricks to get this thing mated. So the most important part is to get the dowel pins in the block, and you're not supposed to use a ratchet to draw the transmission up, and we did not use this at all, but my rule of thumb is if you get the dowel pins to the face of where they go, if you can turn the bolts in slowly from side to side with a 1/4-inch ratchet, it's good. The stuff is aligned, and if you're not cranking on a 1/4-inch ratchet, everything's aligned, the pilot bearing's aligned, the dowel pins are good. So how we got it to that point though is we jacked the tranny all the way up, and then we used the screws to get the left to right. You can see your dowel pins are a little high or a little low, so you get the left to right. But the most important thing is the face of the transmission and the face of the engine block have to be parallel to each other to get to this point. So we got them parallel, and we slid the transmission forward, like pushing here and here, and it stopped. And I, from experience, knew exactly why it stopped, and it was because the splines in the input shaft of the transmission were not lined up with the splines on the clutch plate. So what we did is I knew from experience to grab the drive shaft. I went ahead and grabbed the drive shaft, and put it into the input or the output shaft of the transmission. And literally, I gave it a wiggle, one this way, and the transmission slid right in. So once that was lined up, it slid all the way up to where the dowel pins were hitting. And then I just grabbed my 1/4 inch ratchet on a nice long extension. I put one bolt in on this side and one bolt in on that side. And you give it a couple turns here, give it a couple turns there. And eventually it's gonna mate all the way up. And then you can put the rest of your bolts in and continue the job. All right, so you can see the gap. This is the engine block and this is the transmission. And what you're gonna notice though is a lot of times is that it'll be like smaller at the bottom, bigger at the top. You need to get it as close as possible as flush. So, and it's this simple. Here's the 1/4 inch socket and you can watch this thing mate right up with just the ease of a turn. If it's not going in that easy, you probably got something off. So, might need to take it apart, clean your dowel pins up, make sure your pilot bearing isn't damaged. Make sure you haven't damaged your clutch plate, but it should slide together easy. All right, so now we're under the car. Obviously, we got the tranny jack out. We went ahead and tightened all our bell housing bolts with the 1/2 inch ratchet. We're gonna put this black bracket in. I didn't really show it in the first video, but this is the black bracket that the strut goes on that I was talking about. It mounts pretty easy. There's a couple little tabs up here, kind of slides into position on. It lives right here. There's an ear like that. So then there's a really long bolt that goes through this one. It goes all the way through the tranny. It has a nut on the far side. Yep, so there's a nut on the far side. Get that started real quick. Okay, and then we'll grab the other bolts. And this one here. This one here is got 2 washers and a nut.
Show that again. Okay. Yeah.
It's got the 2 loose washers. That's the one that holds the one forward. And then obviously the nut on the back side. Must not be the right bolt. Oh, there's the nut. One with the washers is actually I believe we're going to use this one. Okay, and then there's a nut. Goes on the back. The one with the washers is actually the front bolt for the strut bar. I'm just loosely putting these in. All right, so then here's the strut.
The dog bone strut.
Or a dog bone, you could call it. The fat end.
Like a hillbilly.
The fat end's gonna go on the body. Up in there. Okay. And I was wrong. The ones with the washers goes here on the face above the hole. I thought it was going in, but they go right there, not on the back. All right. And then this other bolt's going to be kind of difficult to get in because there's a little bit of, you can see that the hole isn't aligned. So
we can't see that.
You can't get up there. Anyway, the pressure from the tranny kind of hanging down is pushing down. So if you push forward, it'll.
Oh, you're talking about the big end of the dog pole.
Yeah.
Okay, we're on the other end now.
Okay.
You just
So we got
jiggled
that
her
started.
around to
Yep.
get her aligned.
And then, so this is the long bell housing bolt, and it belongs in this hole right here. And you need to remember that it's this bracket that has these two connectors on it. One's like a brown color and one's a gray color. So the bell housing bolt goes through that bracket, and then it goes in like this. And all these bolts are 14 millimeter. So you just zip all these nice and snug. This is a vent tube that goes down right below the dipstick. And there's nothing on the other end. It just kind of loops around and it's dead. So that's just the vent. All right, so that's all the forward stuff. We actually took the intercooler out because we were having trouble getting this transmission separated, and we used some screwdrivers and stuff on the top side. And so we'll go to the top side and reattach the slave. There's just 2 bolts that hold that on there, but I'm gonna tighten all these bolts up and get these connectors finalized, and that's everything for the front of the transmission. Okay, we got everything tightened up on this. All the bracketry's back in place. These connectors are plugged in. This is back where it's supposed to go, the vent. You're gonna see though, I left this bolt right here loose, and the reason I left it loose is because the brackets underneath the transmission aren't tight yet, and you don't wanna create a bind. You wanna get the brackets on the bottom of the tranny, bolt it up, and then tighten that up afterwards. So that's one thing you need to pay attention to. And then real quick, we bolted these both back in. The cable popped right on that boss back there, no problem. This one, we left the bracket on the transmission. We just slid that back in there. You put this little fork back in, kind of tap it in place, and then you put it back on the boss with the cotter pin. So that's the linkage. And then we're gonna go down here and we're gonna start putting on all of our cross members. There's these 2 big ones. I didn't take these 2 out, so this one goes on first. Kind of looks like a cross, and it goes over the exhaust, and then those 2 studs go through this right here, these 2 holes. Okay, once those are aligned, you just put 2 nuts right there. And I like to put just stuff on loose at first before you torque anything. So we're gonna do the 2 nuts, and then we're gonna grab the 4 bolts that bolt the back to the body. Get those started. Okay, so we got those going. And then we're gonna grab the other wishbone, this guy, and it lives on these 2. The steep side is on the passenger side, and then the 2 18 mil or 17 millimeter bolts hold that up. This one's gonna be kind of hard to get in because, you know, the tranny's not all the way up, but you just gotta push up a little bit. Get this guy going. Then you're gonna grab your ratchet or your impact, and you're gonna start zipping all these tight. Obviously there's... All right, so now it's the drive shaft. The drive shaft goes in the trans first. Okay. Slid in.
Upside down.
Yep.
A good idea is to be the right way up first. Just say shut up, cameraman.
the 4 bolts with the yoke. Okay, drop one. All right, so then we're gonna put the nuts on that, but as well, we're not gonna forget about our heat shield. The heat shield's gonna go back in right here. The two skinny, or the skinnier sides forward, it just slides back over. There's 4 bolts that hold it up. It's pretty simple. So we're gonna go ahead and tighten up all this stuff. And that's pretty much the bottom of the car. Once you get this heat shield on, everything is pretty much tied up. We're gonna move to the top and put the slave cylinder back in. Like I said, I pulled the intercooler to be able to get some separation on the bell housing. This transmission was very glued. So we're gonna put that stuff back together and then slap our CVs and our brakes and our wheels and tires, and this job will be done. So stick around if you need the help. All right, so here's that strut that we were talking about that you need to get from the top, or you don't have to, but it's much easier to get it from up here. So might as well. We had the intercooler out because our transmission wouldn't separate, and we had to jam some stuff down in between. So that makes it nice and easy.
Intercooler mount. So this one is still loose back here, correct?
This one back here, no, we tightened it.
Oh,
already.
you did tighten it.
Yep. And then
It's
I left this.
camera.
I left this on loose as well because it's kind of a pain to get to from down there. So that's both the bolts for the black bracket. Now there's two 14 millis for the slave cylinder. The slave cylinder is extended, so you got to kind of push it in. It might be a little difficult if your hands aren't real strong, but it will compress.
Or just get your mom to do it for you.
You can do that. It might be a little hard. It's going to be a little awkward because it's pushing back the whole time as well. But once you get one, maybe.
Or if you absolutely could not get it, you could probably bleed the pressure, but I would not recommend
No,
that.
you could bleed the pressure. Don't cross thread it though, that's for sure. Okay, those are started nice and clean. That's fully installed. The only thing left is to slide the intercooler back in. Sit over here on the workbench. It's really easy to install. All it is 2 bolts, 2 13 millimeters, and you slide this on the tubes, on the boost tubes. I would suggest you put it on this back one first because it doesn't have any deflection in it.
Yeah, because this one has deflection between these two.
So it just slides in like that, and then 13 milli there. And then you gotta slide this in, which this one has. It's plastic, so it slides a little bit. Yeah, and then you just put these two 13 millis in. Okay, that one's tight. You grab it. 8mm.
And then you drop it. And grab a new one.
Okay, and then the 8mm band clamp. Very important that you tighten these. If you don't, as soon as you hit boost first time, you're gonna have a big boost leak. So, like I said, this isn't necessary, but you can do it if you're having difficulty getting all the stuff off the top. And if you're having difficulty like we were getting the transmission separated, which is super common. For some reason, these things just glue themselves together. All right, so now I got those two boost tubes good and snug. And that's all that you have to do under the hood. We're gonna slap the CV shafts in and the brakes.
Where's the cover? Did this car
It was
come?
all missing when we started, so.
Okay. Including this cover?
Yeah, all
Okay.
that was gone. All right, so now we're over here on the passenger side. We're gonna put the CV back in. Now, this should be pretty self-explanatory. Slide it in, give it a couple pumps, slides into the trans, slide it back into the knuckle, and then I always like to take and turn the wheel back to straight. Wiggle that in, slide that. This time I grab the axle nut just to keep it from falling back out. Remember that the eccentric bolt always goes in the top. So grab the normal bolt for the knuckle.
The eccentric probably won't fit in the other hole unless you force it. It probably still wouldn't fit.
Slide the bottom in. The eccentric, I believe it will fit in both of them. But
Will it? Oh, you know more than me. I was just looking at the oblong shouldn't fit in a round hole, but
all right, so that's that. And you're going to torque all that stuff. This is the speed sensor I talked about in the first video. It's out. You just pop it in, pretty simple. AJ can zoom in there and show you where it sticks into. It's a 10mm bolt.
where's the 10 mil bolt at?
Down here.
Oh, okay, that's where it goes in. Okay,
Yep.
you better edit that part out.
Alright, so now we got 10 mil. Stick that in there. Alright, now I'm going to grab the impact. I'm going to zip these knuckle bolts, slide the rotor on, put my caliper back on.
Old discalators.
And then this is going to be torqued. I don't have the spec at the second, but I'm going to torque this to its spec and do the same thing on the other side. Bolt the wheels up and get this thing started up.